Um, I was sent down to meet a lady, casting lady at that time. Her name was Marion Doherty. And Marion said, I have a project that you should go meet on. And so she went with me, as I recall the first time, put me in a cab and went with me and brought me and introduced me to Dan Curtis. And I believe his offices at that time were on Park Avenue in New York. I'm not sure about that. And they asked me to do a scene, for him, whatever. So I did a scene from Tennessee Williams' Summer and Smoke. I had an acting partner that I did these sorts of things with, and she kindly consented to go along with me up to Dan's and do a scene from Summer and Smoke. And Dan had a green carpet, and he had some golf balls laying all over the place. So I remember picking up the golf balls before, a couple of golf balls before I did the scene. I did the scene, and he liked it and decided that he wanted to look at me on camera. So a few days later, I went over to 53rd Street where the studio was, and was quite innocent and unsophisticated basically about it all. Went in, and they took me out on the floor during their, break there or whatever, and looked at me on camera, turn this way, turn this way, hello, how are you, and all of these things, and that was it. And then a few days later, I guess, or soon afterward, I found out that I had gotten the job, and that's basically it. Ironically, what had happened was I was looking for a new agent, and I had gone, somebody I had met had called an agent over at what is now ICM, what used to be Ashley Famous in New York City. And they said, come on up. So I went up there and I did the same scene for them, a few agents that I did for Dan. But at that meeting they said, hey, there's this project. That was the first thing I had done. And they said, listen, there's this project called Dark Shadows. It's this show called Dark Shadows. Marion Doherty's looking for somebody. Will you go and meet her? So the very next day, I went on a meeting. So I hadn't even signed with the agency, and they had sent me down to meet Marion. And so it was quite wonderful. That's the story. It's funny, I didn't know about Dark Shadows, so I was coming into it completely unknowledgeable, not educated about the show, had no clue about its following at that time, and was just quite taken aback when I realized what it was. And in fact, during the first 2 or 3 months during the show, the character didn't speak. He was a ghost, and so he didn't speak at all. And people started teasing me, well, Selby, when you start talking, that'll be the end of you. It'd be like the old silent movie days, when somebody came up with a very high voice, they got rid of you, So I was concerned about that, oh God, they won't like it. But fortunately, it turned out to be, fine and whatever. And then, actually, what happened was, it was the only, once I became a little more sophisticated or knowledgeable about the show and everything, and then I realized that we had gone back in time for the Quentin story. And it was, in looking back at the show, it was the only other story that wasn't contingent upon Barnabas. I mean, it was totally of its own. And it was quite wonderful. It was a great story, maybe the best story that we did, because just a coincidental of factors, the kinds of characters that you had, and the fact that we went back. We went back in time. And they had developed a good character, Quentin. And I was just happened to be there at that particular time, right place at the right time, and got lucky, and knock on wood, that I was the one chosen to play Quentin. I was always curious as to when is this guy going to talk. I don't recall being told that eventually you will talk. I mean, I think what happened was we probably stretched that out as long as as we could. You know, they got as much mileage out of it as we could, and probably somebody said, Sam or Dan said, Dan probably says, we got to hear this guy talk eventually, you know, and so I do think, and maybe the letters started coming in. I don't know. They wanted to hear him. I don't know. But I probably sensed that we had played it out. I mean, we had to move on, you know, out of that. We got it, storyline-wise, they got as much mileage out of that as they could at that time, maybe. Certainly, the backstory of Quentin owes its, I don't know, owes its what? Pays homage, let's just say it that way, pays homage to Turn of the Screw. There were other, besides Turn of the Screw, as we followed on down, there was the Picture of Dorian Gray. There were various things like that, and certainly these were spin-offs of those classic stories. And there was absolutely nothing wrong with that, and because if you're going to spin off something on that, then you want to use a very classic kind of tale, and certainly Turn of the Screw, Picture of Dorian Gray, all of those were classic in all of our upbringing. So it's not that we didn't realize that at the time. We knew that, and we were just using those stories as a kind of, you know, spin-off, and it's quite terrific. But I'm glad Dan chose me, so all of this is indeed his fault.